They reached the entrance to the Grand Council chamber, and Wei Lin paused with her hand on the ancient door. "The terms of surrender are simple," she said. "The council is dissolved. All subjugated species are granted immediate independence. Reparations will be paid to every civilization you exploited, and humanity will oversee the transition to a new galactic government for the next 100 years. Kethrix felt something cold settle into his heart. "And what of us?" he asked. "What of the species who ruled before?" Wei Lin looked at him with an expression that was neither cruel nor kind. "Simply honest. You will become what everyone else has always been," she said. "Equals among many, rather than masters of all. Your empires will shrink to your homeworlds and a few colony systems. Enough to sustain your civilizations, but not enough to threaten others. And if we refuse?" "You will not refuse," Wei Lin said. And there was no threat in her voice, just certainty. "Because you have seen what we can do. And you know that resistance means extinction. But more than that, you will not refuse because somewhere in your hearts, you know that your rule was never just." She opened the door, and they walked together into the Grand Council chamber. The assembled delegates watched in silence as Admiral Wei Lin took her place at the center of the room. Standing on the same petitioner's platform, where her grandmother had once begged for recognition, "The Galactic Council of 12 is dissolved," she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "A new era begins today, one built on principles of equality, respect, and cooperation rather than conquest and domination." She looked at each of the assembled delegates in turn. "You are not our prisoners," she said. "You are not our subjects. You are the first citizens of a new galactic order, one that will be judged not by the power it wields, but by the justice it upholds." High Speaker Kethrix stepped forward, his ceremonial robes heavy with the weight of a history that was ending. "You could destroy us," he said. "After everything we have done, you could erase our civilizations from existence, and no one in the galaxy would mourn. Why do you show mercy to those who showed you none?" Admiral Wei Lin smiled, and for a moment, Kethrix saw the ghost of Elena Vasquez in her expression. "Because 40 years ago, a woman stood in this chamber and asked for friendship," she said. "She believed that the galaxy could be better than it was, that ancient enemies could become allies, that the darkness between the stars could be filled with light instead of fear." She paused, and her voice softened. "My grandmother died still believing in that dream, and I will not dishonor her memory by becoming the monster she fought against. We want your reformation, not your extinction. We want partners, not subjects." The chamber was silent for a long moment then. Slowly, Kethrix lowered himself to one knee, his ancient joints protesting the unfamiliar posture. "Then we accept your terms," he said. "Not because we fear your power, but because we recognize the justice in your words. The Vethkai will join this new order as equals, and we will spend whatever years remain to us trying to become worthy of the mercy you have shown." One by one, the other delegates followed his example, kneeling before the human admiral who had conquered the galaxy without hatred in her heart. Wei Lin watched them bow, and she felt the weight of history settling onto her shoulders. Her grandmother had dreamed of a galaxy united in peace, and now that dream was within reach. But the work of building such a future would be harder than any war. She thought of the children being born across human space, children who would grow up in a universe where their species was not mocked or dismissed, where their potential was not limited by the contempt of ancient powers. She thought of the hundreds of species that had lived under council oppression for millennia, finally free to chart their own destinies. And she thought of Elena Vasquez, who had planted a seed of hope in the darkness and trusted that future generations would help it grow. "Rise," Wei Lin said to the kneeling delegates. "We have much work to do, and the building of a better galaxy requires partners standing together. not subjects kneeling in submission. They rose. And the long process of rebuilding began in the years that followed. Schools across the galaxy taught a new proverb, words that children of 100 species learned before they could count or read. Be kind to the newcomers. The saying went, you never know what gods walk among the young, and humanity, once mocked and dismissed, took its place not as conquerors but as guardians, ensuring that the stars remained open to every species brave enough to reach for them. The council had laughed at the humans for dreaming too big. Now the entire galaxy dreamed with them. The drill bit screamed as it tore through ancient ice. And then it stopped with a sound that made every worker on the platform freeze in place. The Yevgenia Volkov pushed through the crowd of engineers and technicians, her breath forming clouds in the brutal Siberian cold that reached 40 degrees below zero on this particular morning in eastern Siberia. What happened? She demanded. Grabbing the shoulder of the lead drill operator, the man turned to face her with eyes wide with confusion and something that looked very much like fear. We hit something, he said in a voice barely above a whisper. Something that should not be there. Yevgenia had spent 20 years drilling into the frozen earth of Russia, searching for minerals and oil and anything else that might be buried beneath the permafrost. And in all those years, she had never seen a drill operator look so disturbed by a simple obstruction. She climbed down into the monitoring station and studied the readouts on the screens. And what she saw made her heart skip several beats in rapid succession. The drill had been cutting through ice that was over 40,000 years old according to their instruments. Ice that had formed when mammoths still walked the earth and humans were just beginning to spread across the continents. And at exactly 300 meters below the surface, it had encountered something that registered as neither rock nor metal nor any material in their database. Get me a camera down there, she ordered. I want to see what we found. It took 3 hours to lower the specialized deep ice camera to the obstruction point. And when the image finally appeared on the main screen, every person in the control room fell completely silent. The camera revealed a surface of perfect black, smooth as polished glass and utterly unmarked by the crushing weight of ice that had pressed against it for millennia. And the surface curved away in both directions, suggesting something massive buried beneath the Mavinia reached for her. Satellite phone with trembling hands and dialed a number she had hoped she would never need to use within 72 hours. The remote drilling site had transformed into something resembling a military installation, with helicopters arriving every few hours carrying scientists and soldiers and equipment. But Yevgenia did not recognize among the new arrivals was a tall American man with graying hair and tired eyes who introduced himself as Dr. Marcus Chun from a Curtis Chun from a Collier University department that officially did not exist. You are the one who writes about ancient aliens? Yevgenia said with a skeptical tone. When they shook hands, Marcus smiled without any humor and replied, and you are the one who just found proof that I was right all along. The excavation took 6 months of careful work, melting away the ice layer by layer to avoid damaging whatever lay beneath. And with each passing week, the true scale of the discovery became more and more apparent. It was a massive ring of some unknown alloy that stood over 30 meters tall and 20 meters wide, covered in geometric symbols that seemed to shift and change whenever someone looked at them directly. And despite being buried for over 40,000 years, it showed absolutely no signs of decay or damage. This is impossible, whispered one of the metallurgists after running her 100th test on a sample. This material does not match anything in nature or anything we have ever created in a laboratory. Marcus spent his days photographing the symbols and comparing them to ancient rock carvings from sites around the world. And he grew more agitated with each connection he discovered. These symbols appear in cave paintings in France, he told Yevgenia one evening over coffee that had gone cold hours ago. And in rock art in Australia, and in carvings in South America. And all of them date to roughly the same period as this ring. What does that mean? She asked. It means that someone was trying to tell us about this, Marcus replied. Our ancestors saw this thing, and they tried to warn their descendants. But we forgot how to read their message on the day the excavation finally cleared the last layer of ice from the ring. Something extraordinary happened. The symbols on the ring began to glow with a soft blue light that pulsed like a heartbeat. And then a membrane of shimmering energy filled the empty space within the ring, rippling like the surface of a vertical lake. Nobody move, shouted the military commander. But his order came too late. A small drone that had been hovering near the ring was pulled through the membrane by some invisible force. And everyone watched in stunned silence as the drone's camera feed continued transmitting from the other side. The screen showed an alien sky of deep purple with 3 suns arranged in a triangle formation. And beneath that impossible sky stretched the landscape of towering spires and crumbling structures that clearly had not been built by human hands. It is a door, Yevgenia breathed. A door to another world. Marcus grabbed her arm and pointed at the screen, where the drone was now panning across the alien landscape. And she saw something that made her blood run cold. Among the ruins there were figures moving, tall and thin, and definitely not human. And they had noticed the drone. The transmission cut out abruptly, and the membrane within the ring flickered once before stabilizing again into that same rippling surface of light. We need to tell the world, one of the younger scientists said, but he was immediately seized by soldiers and escorted away from the site. The military commander stepped forward and addressed the assembled team with a hard expression on his weathered face. No one is telling anyone anything, he declared. As of this moment, everything you have seen here is classified at the highest level. And anyone who speaks of this will spend the rest of their life in a prison that does not officially exist. But even as he spoke, Yevgenia could see that his hands were shaking, because they all understood that the world had just changed forever. The gate stood silent and waiting in the Siberian ice, its membrane shimmering with light from a distant sun. And somewhere on the other side, civilization far older than humanity had just learned that they were not alone in the universe. Yevgenia looked at Marcus and saw her own thoughts reflected in his eyes. They know we are here now, she said quietly. Marcus nodded slowly and replied, and soon we will have to decide what to do about that. The wind howled across the frozen landscape, carrying with it the promise of something new and terrifying and wonderful all at once. And deep in her heart, Yevgenia knew that humanity was standing at the threshold of its greatest adventure or its final destruction. The gate waited, patient and eternal, and somewhere beyond that rippling membrane of light, a universe of secrets was waiting to be discovered by a species that had spent its entire existence believing it was alone among the stars. Everything was about to change, and there was no going back to the world they had known before this moment. The drilling team had come to Siberia looking for oil and minerals, but what they had found was something far more valuable and far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. They had found a door that was never meant to be opened by human hands. 3 weeks after the gate activated, a team of 12 volunteers stood before the shimmering membrane with their hearts pounding in their chests. Br. Marcus Chen was among them, along with Dr. Yevgenia Volkov and 10 soldiers who had been selected for their courage and their ability to remain calm under impossible circumstances. Remember your training, the military commander said as he checked their equipment one final time. Observe and report, and do not engage with any hostile forces unless absolutely necessary. Marcus almost laughed at the absurdity of training for something no human had ever done before. But he kept his expression serious and simply nodded in response. Evania squeezed his hand once and then released it. And together they walked toward the light. The sensation of passing through the membrane was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. Like being pulled apart and reassembled in the space between heartbeats. And when he opened his eyes, he was standing on alien soil beneath 3 burning suns. The air smelled different here, carrying strange scents that his brain could not identify. And the gravity was slightly lighter than Earth, which made him feel like he might float away if he moved too quickly. "My God," whispered one of the soldiers behind him. And Marcus understood exactly how the man felt. The landscape stretched before them in shades of purple and gold, with towering spires of crystal rising from the ground like the fingers of some buried giant reaching toward the sky. And in the distance, they could see the ruins of what must have once been a magnificent city. "This world is dying," Yevgenia said as she studied the readings on her scientific instruments. "The atmosphere is thin and getting thinner, and the plant life is almost completely gone." Before Marcus could respond, a blinding light appeared directly in front of them. And when it faded, there were beings standing where nothing had been a moment before. Marcus had seen countless depictions of aliens in movies and television shows throughout his life. But nothing had prepared him for the reality of standing face to face with creatures from another world. The beings before him were tall and elegant, with bodies that seemed to be made of living crystal that caught the light of the 3 suns and scattered it into rainbows. And they moved with a fluid grace that made humans look clumsy in comparison. One of them stepped forward, and when it spoke, its voice resonated directly inside Marcus's head without passing through his ears. "You should not be here," the being said. "The gate to your world was sealed 40,000 of your years ago, and it was never meant to be opened again. Who are you?" Marcus asked, fighting to keep his voice steady. "I am called Orvith," the crystalline being replied, "and I speak for the Covenant of Silence, the alliance of 7 elder species who have protected the gate network since before your ancestors climbed down from the trees." Orvith gestured to the other beings behind him, and Marcus saw that each one was different from the others, representing different species from different worlds across the galaxy. "You know about us?" Yevgenia asked with surprise clear in her voice. "We have watched your species since your earliest days," Orvith answered. "We observed you when you first learned to make tools, and when you first discovered fire, and when you first began to kill each other and organize warfare." The being's crystal body flickered with colors that Marcus interpreted as something like sadness or disappointment. "Your species was classified as Quarantine Level 1 over 40,000 years ago," Orvith continued. "You were deemed too aggressive and too unpredictable and too dangerously adaptable to be trusted with access to the gate network." "What does that mean?" One of the soldiers demanded. "What gives you the right to decide what we can and cannot do?" Orvith turned its faceless head toward the soldier, and for a moment, the air seemed to grow colder despite the heat of the 3 suns. "We have that right because we have seen what happens when violent species gain access to the stars," Orvith replied. "We have watched worlds burn and civilizations fall and billions of lives end because we failed to act quickly enough." The being gestured toward the ruins in the distance, and Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "This world was once home to a species much like yours," Orvith explained. "They were clever and ambitious, and they refused to accept the limits we tried to impose upon them. And within 3 centuries, they had destroyed not only themselves, but 17 other species across 4 star systems. We would never do something like that." Yevgenia protested. "That is exactly what they said," Orvith replied. "And yet, here stand the ruins of their civilization as proof that good intentions mean nothing when combined with the capacity for violence." The crystalline beings consulted with each other in a language of flashing lights and resonating tones. And then Orvith stepped forward again with what felt like a final judgment. You have one rotation of this planet to return through the gate and submit to memory erasure. The being announced. All knowledge of the gate and what lies beyond it will be removed from your minds. And then the gate will be permanently destroyed. And if we refuse? Marcus asked, though he already suspected the answer. Then we will be forced to implement correction protocols. Orvis said without any emotion in its resonating voice. Your species will be neutralized as a threat to galactic stability. You mean you will kill us? Yevgenia said. All 8 billion of us. Correction is not a pleasant process, Orvis admitted. But it is sometimes necessary for the greater good of the galaxy. Marcus looked at the ruins surrounding them and thought about all the species that must have stood in the same position throughout the history of the universe, facing the same impossible choice between submission and extinction. What happened to the others? He asked, the species who refused your ultimatum before us? Urvith did not answer with words, but the crystalline being turned and gestured toward the endless fields of ruins that stretched to the horizon in every direction. The remnants of civilizations that had dared to defy the covenant of silence. The message was clear enough without any words being spoken. Marcus looked at his team and saw fear in their eyes. But he also saw something else burning beneath that fear. Something that looked very much like defiance. We need to contact Earth, he said quietly to Yevgenia. The world needs to know what we are facing. She nodded in agreement. And together, they began planning their next move while the crystalline beings watched with ancient eyes that had seen countless species rise and fall throughout the long history of the cosmos somewhere back on Earth. 8 billion humans were going about their daily lives with no idea that their fate was being decided by beings they could not even imagine, and the clock was already ticking toward a deadline that would determine whether humanity had a future among the stars or whether they would become just another set of ruins beneath an alien sky. The choice that lay ahead would define the human species forever. And Marcus knew in his heart that submission was not an option his people would accept. Humanity had not crawled from the mud and reached for the stars just to be told that the universe was not for them. Real fight was only beginning. The transmission from the alien world arrived on every screen on Earth at exactly midnight Greenwich Mean Time, interrupting regular programming across every network and streaming service on the planet. Marcus Chun stood before the camera with the ruins of Verith Null visible behind him and the 3 suns casting strange shadows across his tired face. My name is Dr. Marcus Chun, he began, and I am speaking to you from another world. Within minutes, the video had been viewed by hundreds of millions of people. And within hours that number had grown to billions, as the entire human race watched in stunned silence while Marcus explained what the team had discovered and what the covenant of silence had demanded. They want us to forget, Marcus said with determination burning in his eyes. They want us to crawl back through the gate and pretend that none of this ever happened. And if we refuse, they will destroy us. The camera panned across the gathered aliens, their crystalline bodies catching the light of the alien suns. And for the first time in history, humanity saw definitive proof that they were not alone in the universe. We have been given until tomorrow to make our choice, Marcus continued. But I believe that choice belongs to all of humanity, not just the 12 of us standing here on this alien soil. The transmission ended, and Earth erupted into chaos. In the first hours, there was panic and fear as people struggled to comprehend the reality of what they had just witnessed. But as the sun rose across the different time zones, something remarkable began to happen. World leaders who had spent decades as bitter rivals began picking up phones and calling each other, setting aside ancient grudges in the face of a threat that made their petty conflicts seem utterly meaningless. Emergency sessions were convened at the United Nations and in capital cities around the globe. And for the first time in human history, every nation on Earth found itself united behind a single purpose. "We will not submit," declared the President of the United States in an address that was broadcast worldwide. "We will not allow our memories to be erased and our future to be stolen." Similar statements poured in from Russia and China and Europe and Africa and every corner of the globe. A chorus of defiance that rose up from a species that had spent its entire existence refusing to accept limits within 72 hours. A military expedition force had been assembled from the combined armies of 24 nations, equipped with the most advanced weapons that human technology could provide. They marched through the Siberian Gate in a steady stream. Thousands of soldiers from countries that had been enemies just days before, united now by something greater than nationalism or ideology on Vareth Null. The Covenant watched in silent bewilderment as the humans refused to comply with their ultimatum and instead sent more of their kind through the gate. "This is unprecedented," Orvith said to the other members of the Covenant. "No quarantined species has ever responded to correction protocols with such organized resistance." "They are insane," replied a being that resembled a floating mass of dark energy. "Do they not understand that our fleet can turn their entire planet to ash within hours?" "Perhaps that is precisely why they resist," Orvith mused. "They know they cannot win, and yet they choose to fight anyway, while the diplomats and soldiers position themselves for conflict." A small team of human engineers was working on something far more subtle and far more dangerous. Dr. Sarah Kim, a quantum physicist who had been studying the gate technology since the first day of the excavation, had made a discovery that changed everything. "The entire gate network is connected," she explained to Marcus during a hurried meeting in one of the makeshift shelters. "Every gate in the galaxy is linked through quantum entangled cores that share energy and information across impossible distances." "What does that mean for us?" Marcus asked. Sarah took a deep breath before answering. "It means that if we generate a sufficiently powerful electromagnetic pulse and channel it through this gate, it will cascade through the entire network and destroy every gate simultaneously." The implications of her words hung in the air between them like a storm cloud gathering on the horizon. "You are talking about destroying their entire civilization," Marcus said quietly. "I'm talking about giving us leverage," Sarah replied. "Right now they hold all the power because they can destroy us without any consequences. But if we can threaten something they value, then suddenly we have something to negotiate with." Marcus brought the proposal to the Joint Command Council, and after hours of heated debate, the decision was made to proceed. The engineers worked through the night to construct the device, using human technology jury-rigged to interface with alien systems, and by morning they had created something that had never existed before in the history of the galaxy: a dead man switch capable of destroying an interstellar infrastructure that had taken millions of years to build. When Orvith and the Covenant were informed of what the humans had created, the crystalline being's body flickered with colors that might have indicated shock or disbelief. "You would destroy the gate network?" Orvith asked. "You would cut off thousands of worlds from each other and condemn countless species to isolation?" "We would prefer not to," Marcus answered calmly. "But we have learned throughout our history that the only way to deal with those who threaten your existence is to make the cost of aggression unacceptable." The Covenant deliberated for what felt like an eternity while the humans waited with their hands hovering over the trigger of their improvised doomsday weapon. Finally, Orvith stepped forward and spoke words that no member of the Covenant had ever expected to speak to a quarantined species. "We are willing to negotiate." Wave of relief passed through the human delegation, though everyone understood that the hardest part was still ahead. "What are your terms?" Marcus asked. Orvith's crystal body pulsed with complex patterns of light as it communicated with the other members of the Covenant. And then it turned back to face the humans with something that might have been respect in its alien voice. "There is an ancient tradition among our peoples," Orvith explained. "A trial designed to determine whether a quarantined species has evolved beyond its violent origins." "What kind of trial?" Yevgenia asked. "One that will test the very nature of your species," Orvith replied. "If you pass, you will be granted membership in the Covenant and access to the Gate Network. But if you fail, the correction protocols will be implemented immediately." Marcus looked at his fellow humans, seeing in their eyes the same mixture of hope and fear that he felt in his own heart. "We accept," he said. Speaking for a species that had never backed down from a challenge in all its long and bloody history, the trial of humanity was about to begin, and the fate of 8 billion souls would rest on the choices of a few representatives standing beneath the light of alien suns. Whatever happened next would determine whether humanity joined the community of galactic civilizations or became another cautionary tale whispered among the stars. The universe was watching, and humanity intended to prove that it deserved its place among the stars. The real test was only beginning, and everything depended on showing the Covenant what humans were truly made of. The human delegation arrived at Varith Prime through a gate that opened onto a world unlike anything they had ever imagined, where Varith Null had been a place of ruins and death. Varith Prime was alive with light and energy and structures that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Towers that floated without any visible support, and bridges made of solidified light-spanning chasms that dropped into infinity. Marcus Chun led the team of 12 humans who had been chosen to represent their entire species, each one selected for different qualities that the strategists back on Earth had decided might be valuable in the unknown challenges ahead. Among them was Captain Yuki Tanaka, a Japanese soldier who had served in peacekeeping missions around the world and who possessed a rare combination of combat skills and diplomatic instincts. Orv met them at the gate and escorted them through the magnificent city to a vast arena that had been ancient. When the first humans were learning to walk upright, the trial consists of 3 challenges, Orvith explained as they walked, each one designed to reveal a fundamental truth about your species. "What happens if we fail even one of them?" Marcus asked. "Then the trial ends and the correction protocols are implemented," Orvith replied without any emotion in its resonating voice. "There are no second chances and no appeals." The first challenge began without warning. One moment, the human delegation was standing in the arena, surrounded by members of the 7 elder species. And the next moment they found themselves in a sealed chamber with a dozen creatures that looked like nightmares given physical form. The beings were massive and covered in armored scales, with claws that could tear through steel and teeth that dripped with some kind of corrosive venom. And they looked at the humans with hunger burning in their multiple eyes. "This is the challenge of brutality," Orvith's voice echoed through the chamber. "The creatures before you are called the Vex, and they have been conditioned to kill anything that moves." Several of the human soldiers raised their weapons, but Captain Tanaka shouted for them to stop. "Wait," she commanded. "Look at them carefully." Marcus forced himself to look past his terror and really study the creatures. And that was when he noticed something strange. The Vex were not attacking, despite having every opportunity to do so. And in their multiple eyes, he saw something that looked remarkably like fear. "They are as trapped as we are," Tanaka said softly. "They did not choose to be here any more than we did." Instead of attacking, Tanaka lowered her weapon and stepped forward with her hands raised in a gesture of peace. And the other humans followed her example, despite the protests of their instincts. Lead Vex creature tilted its massive head and made a sound that resonated through the chamber. And somehow Tanaka understood that it was asking a question. She responded by pointing to herself and then to the Vex, and then making a circular gesture that encompassed the entire chamber. trying to communicate that they were all prisoners together. For a long and terrifying moment, nothing happened. And then the lead Vex creature lowered its massive body to the ground in a posture of submission. The chamber dissolved around them, and they found themselves back in the arena, with the assembled elder species watching in what seemed like stunned silence. No species has ever passed the first challenge without bloodshed, Orvis said. And for the first time, there was something like surprise in its voice. You were expected to slaughter the Vex to demonstrate your capacity for survival. We survived, Tanaka replied. Just not the way you expected. The second challenge transported them to a chamber filled with technology beyond human comprehension. Devices that hummed with power and displays that showed schematics for machines that could cure every disease and generate unlimited energy and solve every problem that ever plagued human civilization. A being that resembled flowing liquid metal appeared before them and spoke with a voice like singing. Crystal, I am an agent of the Fractured Empire, a faction that opposes the Covenant, the being said. We offer you everything you see here in exchange for one simple thing. What do you want? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. The coordinates to your homeworld, the being replied. Share the location of Earth with us and all of this technology will be yours, along with our protection from the Covenant's correction protocols. The humans looked at each other, and Marcus could see the temptation in some of their eyes. The technology before them could end hunger and disease and poverty, could elevate humanity to a level of advancement that would otherwise take centuries to achieve. And all they had to do was betray the location of their planet to unknown aliens. No, said Dr. Yevgeny Volkov before anyone else could speak. No? The liquid metal being repeated with what sounded like surprise. We do not know your intentions, Yevgenia continued, and we will not trade our people's safety for any amount of technology, no matter how advanced. One by one, the other humans voiced their agreement, refusing the offer unanimously, despite knowing what they were giving up. The chamber disappeared, and they were back in the arena, where Urvith was watching them with an expression that was impossible to read on its crystalline face. The second challenge tests for greed, Urvith explained. Most species fail because they cannot resist the temptation of advancement at any cost. Our advancement means nothing if it comes at the expense of our people, Marcus replied. The third challenge was the worst of all, without any warning. The humans found themselves watching a simulation so realistic that it felt absolutely real. A simulation that showed Earth burning. They watched as massive ships descended through the atmosphere and unleashed weapons that turned cities to glass, as billions of people screamed and died while the planet that had given birth to humanity was systematically reduced to a lifeless rock. This is what happened because of your defiance, Urved's voice told them. While you were traveling to Verith Prime, the Covenant implemented the correction protocols. Marcus fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face as he watched his homeworld die around him. The other humans reacted in different ways, some weeping and some screaming with rage and some falling into silent shock. But not one of them begged for mercy or offered to submit to the Covenant's demands. Why? Demanded Captain Tanaka through her tears. Why show us this? To see how you react when everything is lost, Orvith replied. To see whether despair breaks your spirit or whether you continue to resist even when resistance is meaningless. The simulation continued for what felt like hours, showing the aftermath of Earth's destruction in excruciating detail. And through it all, the humans held on to each other and refused to break. Finally, the simulation faded and they were back in the arena, surrounded by the elder species who were watching them with expressions of complete bewilderment. The third challenge tests for fear, Orvith said. Every species before you has broken under the weight of watching their world destroyed, offering anything and everything to make it stop. Was any of it real? Marcus asked, his voice hoarse from crying. "No," Orvith admitted. "Earth is safe, and your people are alive, but you did not know that. And yet you still refuse to surrender." The crystalline being turned to address the assembled covenant, its body pulsing with complex patterns of light. "In all the millions of years since the trial was created, no species has ever passed all 3 challenges," Orvith declared. "Until today, a murmur passed through the gathered aliens, a sound like wind through crystal chimes. And Marcus realized that they had done something unprecedented in the history of the galaxy. They had proven that humanity was not what the Covenant had believed them to be. Trial was over, and against all odds, humanity had won. But as Marcus looked at the ancient beings surrounding them, he understood that winning the trial was only the beginning. The real challenge of finding humanity's place among the stars was just beginning, and everything they had endured had simply earned them the right to try whatever came next. They would face it together, as a species that had proven it could be tested by the universe and emerge unbroken. The stars were finally within reach, and humanity had earned its chance to shine among them. The great hall of the Covenant fell silent as blaze. Orvith rose to address the assembly of elder species who had governed the galaxy for longer than most stars had burned. "We must speak of what we have witnessed," the crystalline being said, its voice resonating through the vast chamber. "For the first time in our history, a quarantined species has passed all 3 challenges of the trial." Murmurs rippled through the assembly like waves across a cosmic ocean, and Marcus Chen watched from the observation gallery as beings he could barely comprehend debated the fate of his species. "This changes nothing," declared the dark energy being known as Vareth. "The humans remain a threat to galactic stability, regardless of how they performed in controlled conditions." "Does it change nothing?" Orvith replied. "For millions of years we have told ourselves that our purpose was to identify dangerous species and neutralize them before they could cause harm. But I wonder if we have been asking the wrong questions all along." The crystalline being gestured toward the human delegation, and every alien eye turned to study them. "We condemn them for their aggression," Orvith continued. "But when faced with creatures designed to trigger their violent instincts, they chose communication over combat. We condemn them for their greed. But when offered technology beyond their wildest dreams, they refused to trade their people's safety for advancement. We condemn them for their fear. But when shown the destruction of everything they loved, they held together and refused to break." Orvith paused, allowing the weight of those words to settle over the assembly. "Perhaps the qualities we feared in them are not weaknesses at all," the being concluded. "Perhaps they are strengths that we have long forgotten." An ancient being that resembled a living star spoke next, his voice like the birth of galaxies. "The Covenant has existed for 17 million years," it said, "and in all that time, we have maintained peace by eliminating any species that might disrupt the order we have built. But what kind of peace have we truly achieved?" The star being continued. "Our civilizations have not grown or changed or evolved in millions of years, because growth requires struggle, and we have eliminated all struggle from our existence." Marcus listened in growing amazement as the elder species began to debate not whether humanity should be destroyed, but whether humanity might be exactly what their stagnant civilizations needed. "Look at them," Orvith said, gesturing again toward the humans. "In barely 200,000 years, they went from living in caves to splitting atoms and reaching for the stars, while we have remained unchanged for eons." "They are chaos incarnate," Vareth protested. "Yes," Orvith agreed. "And perhaps chaos is exactly what the universe needs." The debate continued for hours that felt like days, and when it finally ended, Orvith approached the human delegation with news that would change the course of galactic history. "The Covenant has reached a decision," the crystalline being announced. "Humanity will be granted provisional membership in the Covenant and full access to the Gate Network. A cheer erupted from the human delegation, but Orvith raised a limb to quiet them. "There is a condition," the being continued. "Unlike every other member species, humanity will not be bound by the laws and traditions that have governed us for millions of years." "What does that mean?" Marcus asked. Orvith's body pulsed with colors that Marcus had learned to recognize as something like hope. "It means that you will write your own rules," Orvith replied. "You will show us what a species can become when it is allowed to grow without limits, and in doing so, perhaps you will teach us how to grow again." The implications of those words took time to fully understand. But Marcus realized that humanity had been given something far more valuable than mere acceptance. They had been given freedom 3 months later. Marcus stood before the gate in Siberia, which had been transformed from a secret military installation into a monument visible to the entire world. Billions of people watched the live broadcast as humanity's first official ambassador prepared to step through the gate and take her place on the galactic stage. Her name was Elena Vasquez, a diplomat who had spent her career building bridges between nations and who now faced the challenge of building bridges between species. She paused before the shimmering membrane and turned to address the cameras, knowing that her words would be heard by every human being alive for our entire existence. "We have looked up at the stars and wondered if we were alone," she said. "Now we know the answer, and it is more complicated than we ever imagined. There are wonders out there beyond anything we can comprehend, and there are dangers that make our worst nightmares seem tame by comparison. But there is also something else, something that the elder species did not expect to find when they looked at us." Elena smiled, and in that smile was the accumulated determination of 8 billion people who had refused to accept limits. "They hid this gate because they feared what we might become," she said. "They watched us from afar and saw our wars and our cruelty and our capacity for destruction. And they decided that we were too dangerous to be trusted. But they forgot something important, something that has defined our species since the very beginning." She looked directly into the camera, and her next words seemed to reach through the screen and touch the heart of every person watching. "We were never afraid of the dark," Elena declared. "We are the species that learn to make fire, and wherever we go, we bring the light with us." She turned and stepped through the gate, disappearing into the light of another world. And humanity took its first step into a future that had once seemed impossible back on Earth. People cheered and cried and held each other, understanding that the universe had just become much larger and much more full of possibility than they had ever dared to dream in. The weeks and months that followed, humans began spreading through the gate network, bringing with them their curiosity and their creativity and their stubborn refusal to accept that anything was impossible. They made friends with species that had been isolated for millennia, solved problems that had puzzled ancient civilizations for eons, and caused more chaos in a single year than the Covenant had experienced in millions. And through it all, Orvith watched with something like wonder in its ancient crystal heart. "You were right to fear them," the dark energy being Vorath said one day as they observed a group of humans teaching alien children how to play soccer on a world with 4 moons. "They are changing everything." "Yes," Orvith agreed. "But perhaps change is not something to be feared." The crystalline being thought of all the species that had stood before the Covenant throughout the ages, all the civilizations that had been deemed too dangerous and eliminated before they could grow, and wondered how many of them might have become something wonderful if they had been given the chance humanity had been given that chance. And they were proving that the universe was far more interesting when it was allowed to grow while the gate in Siberia remained open, a doorway between Earth and infinity. And every day more humans stepped through to find their place among the stars. They were no longer alone, and they never would be again. The universe stretched out before them, vast and mysterious and full of wonders waiting to be discovered. And humanity embraced it with the same fierce joy they had always brought to every new frontier. This was just the beginning of their story among the stars. And whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them the way they had always faced the unknown, with fire in their hearts and light in their hands. Ready to illuminate the darkness wherever they found it, the stars were calling, and humanity had finally answered.